Hello. We'll get started in a second. This is a Glassfish webinar, and this is the Building a Web Application with Java EE webinar. I'm Alexei Musin-Pushkin. I work in the Glassfish engineering group, and today we'll be looking and developing through a set of demos a simple web application using Java EE6. So first, some logistics. This is an end-to-end demo, so it is one big demo actually illustrating hands-on Java EE6. We'll be using stable versions of all the software here, so starting with Glassfish 3.0.1. 3.1 will be out real soon, but I thought it'd be better to actually have a stable version. We'll also be using NetBeans 6.9.1 and Maven 2. Actually, Maven 3 works as well, but we'll stick to Maven 2 at this point. So the total time for this demo is about 40 minutes. We'll have a Q&A session to close, and you'll also have further resources and call to action, things like links and where you can actually get the entire source code I'm going to walk you through. So just some background on the technologies you're going to see in this demo. First, Java EE6, that's the latest version of Java EE, which used to be called J2EE. It's vastly improved, yet also simplified heavily. So there are a number of improved APIs, such as EJB 3.1, Servlet 3.0, JSF 2.0, JPA 2.0. But there are also new APIs such as Manage Beans, CDI, which stands for Context and Dependency Injection, and Bean Validation. And along with that, there's also a right-size web profile that's been defined. That's actually what we're going to use here in this demo. And then there's Glassfish, of course, which offers all of that, which is the Java E6 reference implementation, which we believe is developer-friendly as well as management-compatible. It's open source, it's very modular using OSGI, but also extensible using the HK2 kernel. It's fully supported by Oracle. You can actually buy licenses and support for that. And we have full clustering coming up in version 3.1 just about any time now. Now, getting to the web application itself we're about to build, this is an application to manage a collection of books and CDs. We'll, as I said, based everything on the Java E6 web profile. So anything you see here should run on any Java E6 web profile compliant server. So as part of that, you have JPA 2.0, which is an object relational mapping API. This is version 2.0. There's a business tier written using EJB 3.1, which has lots of new features, some of which we'll look at. And the three last ones are the three technologies we'll focus more on in this demo. The first one is the web tier with JSF. So that's Java Server Faces, the standard MVC framework for writing applications in Java. And the second one is JAX-RS 1.1, which lets you actually use POJO's plain old Java objects and expose them as RESTful resources. And as we'll see, you can actually make those EJBs as well, and as such, make them transactional RESTful resources. And finally, there's the glue and architectural elegance, as I call it, with CDI, which is context and dependency injection, which has a lot to it. We'll only scratch the surface here, but I think, and I hope certainly you find this interesting in this application. So let's actually look at the application that is built. We can actually manage here books and CDs. There's a form to enter new books, and we'll do that in a moment. Let's type beginning Java EE6 with Glassfish 3, an excellent book. I highly recommend this. It's probably somewhere around $45, and it's a book by Antonio Goncalves on the Java EE6 platform. It's pretty thick. It covers a lot of the platform. Lots of illustrations. Let's type in a few tags here. And the language code is EN for English. And we create a book. And that book should actually now be listed, probably the last one. Here it is, in the list of books we have in this table. So beyond that form and that table, what you might notice is that there's actually a purchase or buy me button here. So if I buy this book, I have this message that says this thing is actually added to a shopping cart, and this is the ISBN number that you see here. I can buy a second and a third, and eventually I can click on this button that says checkout, a very typical scenario for a web application. And when I do the checkout, I see that the order actually has those three items, two of which are actually the same. So this is the application we'll be building together, starting off using JSF, moving on to JAX-RS, and then eventually getting to CDI. So as you can see in this picture here, we have a book form controller, which is part of JSF, which will handle the requests sent by the browser. We then have an EJB, which is the book service. And the book service can also be a JAX-RS resource, as I said previously, answering to get, post, put requests, and returning representation in either XML or JSON. The book service itself, because it's transactional, it has very easy access to the database through JPA, and we'll be using JavaDB as the database in this case. And obviously the entity, the JPA entity we'll use is something we call book here, which will be populated with an ISBN generator. So, enough introduction. Let's now move on to the actual code and see how we can make this all work. So moving to the IDE, this is NetBeans 6.9, as I said previously. This is built as a set of Maven projects. So the first project, called Java E6 Hands-on Lab here, actually has three different modules, as we'll see in a second, which are really three exercises for the three different parts I mentioned previously: JSF, JAX-RS, and CDI. So the top level project defines three modules: exercise 1, 2, and 3. So we'll start off with exercise 1. Excuse me. And eventually, before we do that, we can actually look at the POM file. It does define modules. It also defines a number of properties for the runtimes we'll be using. And a number of repositories, as you see here. So looking at the services tab here in the IDE, you see the node for Glassfish 3.0.1, which is the version we'll be using. So why don't we just start it now, and we probably won't have to restart it after that. Every deployment will be done incrementally. So looking at exercise 1, which is about JSF. So this is a WAR application. If you look at the web.inf, one of the new features of Servlet 3.0 is that there is no web.xml. There's only a Sun web XML. New book.xhtml is really a facelet here, and facelets are a HTML, which is well formed. That's XHTML, and we'll get back to this in a second. But looking at the Java code, let's start off with book. Book is a POJO. It doesn't inherit from any class. It doesn't implement any interface, and it's marked with the @entity annotation. This is a JPA 2.0 annotation. It was there in 1.0 as well. It has a number of attributes, an identifier, and a list of strings here, which are there to represent the tags. And one of the new things in JPA 2.0 is the ability to actually map this to a table using the @element collection. The next thing we'll look at is the EJB. The EJB, again, is a POJO, this time marked with the @stateless annotation. It's also annotated with the add interceptor annotation. We'll get back to this in a second. Add persistent context actually tells the container to inject an entity manager. And the entity manager, once initialized by the container, the developer can use it without going through the boilerplate of doing tries and catch for starting and rollbacking potentially the transaction. And calling persist or calling create queries and referencing those queries that you see here expressed with JBQL, which are named queries placed on the entity itself. There's also the add resource annotation, which is interesting because this is part of the annotations defined in GSR 250, the common annotations. With that, you can inject something like the ISBN generator, which is a managed bean. A managed bean is again a GSR 250 annotation, such as post-construct, pre-destroy, that you see here, which are really lifecycle methods. Now, the interceptor that you see here is something that you can apply to those managed beans as well, not just to EJBs. And there's this around invoke method. And by the way, this logging interceptor is the exact same I've applied to item EJB as well. So let's look now at the item bean, which is really the controller I was talking about in the picture. This is a JSF managed bean, which is slightly different from the managed bean we saw a moment ago. This managed bean here is also coupled with a request scope annotation, and that's also an annotation from JSF. We'll see when we get to CDI that these can be replaced with something else. And here I have two injection points defined by the add EJB annotation, one for the EJB we saw a moment ago, and now for another one, which is a singleton. That's a singleton bean, which is instantiated at startup, which is what the add startup annotation means here. And this is a fairly simple language table, which lists a number of codes and the number of equivalents in languages. Now, let's now go back to the facelet, newbook.xhtml. So again, well-formed HTML, that's what this is about. There are a number of declarations here. We'll get to those in a moment. We use CSS, and we have here a form using a composite component, a custom component, a panel grid, and the number of output labels, input text, which is really the form you've seen in the application a moment ago. And what you have here is a bind that happens using the expression language. So the first thing you do is actually bind to an attribute of item bean, which you see here. And I haven't given it a name, but I could actually override the default, which is the name of the class. So item bean, and I can actually have code completion for this. The book, and for a given book, I want the number of pages. And I want to bind this to this output label. And actually style this with the style class attribute here. Then I have the data table, which lists all the books, as you've seen in the demo a moment ago. And that has a very similar approach to using the expression language to bind data. So after this quick walkthrough, let's deploy this. Let's run this, deploy this to Glassfish. So Maven will actually, the reason we use Maven here is that this is usable without any IDE or with the IDE of choice. Pretty much any modern IDE today has fairly good support for Maven. So you could be using all of this in your favorite IDE or just even without an IDE and specifically building and deploying. So I'm deploying this application here, which is exercise 1. And you should see in a moment, it's taken a little while here, I'm not sure why, the application deployed and the browser started with the proper URL. And there we are. So the form is there, and the list of books is there as well. So here's the form, but there's one thing missing, which is the actual button to validate and to submit the form. So if we go back to that Facelet page, we need to actually add that button here. So this is part of the H, as in HTML command button. I will have a value, which is the text that will be shown here, create a book. And then I will actually bind this to not an attribute, to actually a method in my manage bean, item bean. This is the expression language, and actually go to the do create book and properly close that tag. And item bean is again the JSF bean that you saw a moment ago. And the doCreate method is here. It actually sets a number of tags, a content language, and asks the EJB to actually persist the book. And if I refresh this, simple refresh in the browser, I can see now the book is there. So I can type in a new book for the demo. It's a cheap one. The description is really not important or interesting. The number of pages is fairly low. Here are no tags, none, and the English code is here. And this has been added probably at the bottom of the list here. There it is. Now let's take a quick moment and look at the styling. You see I have two images here in the resources directory of my web application. This is how I can reference it. This is a form which has a background image URL set, again, expression language to resource and book.png. There's also a styles.css file here, which is what I use for styling the rest of my components. So the first thing is define this in the output style sheet tag, and then reference specific styles using the style class attribute. And if your IDE has support for CSS, it might also have support for here the completion. Looking at the components here, there's a new component which is called new item, which is really custom component, which has a interface and an implementation. And this is one that I've written myself because I want to be able to deal with books and CDs, and both of those actually have a title, a price, and a description. And here the binding is actually done on a composite component implicit object called CC. And the way I reference this is actually using demo new XML. And the last thing I want to show you here is some templating using a layout.xhtml file, which inserts a title and also has two links using the hcolumn link tag. And finally, some footer here with this small text. So with that, we're done with the JSF part of this webinar. There's more to JSF, and I encourage you to look at further tutorials. The second part I'd like to discuss here is the JAX-RS part. That is the RESTful Resources in Java API, which is now part of the standard EE6 platform. So now I have not only a book, but also a CD, and both of these classes extend an abstract class called item, which has title, price, and description as common attributes. You see there's also here a bean validation annotation called size, And again, this was defined in Java EE6 as one of the new APIs. That's bean validation. The EJB itself is the same as what we've seen a moment ago. Only this time we will add another annotation called path, which belongs to the JAX-RS package. And we'll have an attribute to that annotation, which will be in this case /items, which will instruct the container to place these resources as being available from that URL. The IDE is nice enough here to show us the web resources in a logical node. It shows that there's no sub-resource that you can actually invoke. So let's actually place this at get, as in get HTTP annotation, and a path on this getBook method. Here's a parameter. We'll be passing along an ID for a book. And let's say that this guy is actually able to produce a media type, which in this case will be, let me just resolve a few attributes here. Imports. So in this case, the media type, I want it to be XML. And the book key attribute in the path here, I need to get a hold of that and say that the long here is actually taken. This is the path param taken from the add path annotation as the parameter. So anything when constructing the URL that is there as an attribute will be passed on to this method, which will actually return a book. And that book will be represented in XML. And if we scroll down now, we see that in the HTTP method, we have a getBook method, which returns a book. Now, if we look at the book class itself, this is the JPA entity we've seen previously. Nothing changed there. The only thing we'll do here is actually place an add XML root element, which is a JAXB annotation. And just because we do that, representing the resource as XML or as JSON, as we'll see in a moment, actually comes for free here. We do have a web.xml, and I want to point out here that we'll be removing that, but at this point, what we have is a servlet, which is really the Jersey servlet, and which is mapped on the /resource URL pattern. Again, we'll see how to get rid of web.xml here in a moment. So let's actually run this application and deploy this to Glassfish. Wait for the project to build. Again, this is with Maven. And I think by now we're actually ready to deploy to Glassfish. And here's the application. So the application is deployed. And one thing you can do is here type /exercise2. That's where the application lives. And it's a bit small here. I apologize. /resources /items. Resources is for JAX-RS. Items is for this set of items. And 987, which is one of the identifiers. And here's the XML representation for the book, whose ID is 987. Now that's not very useful to do this in a browser, so we can do this using a curl command line in a terminal. You can also pass headers, HTTP header, an accept header in this case, which will be application JSON, and paste the same URL. And this time, we don't get the data in JSON. It says the resource identified by this request is not capable of generating, according to this accept headers. So this is an HTTP 406. So let's actually fix that. So going back to the EJB itself, let's say that this getBook method is able to serve and represent data as XML, but also with the media type here of application JSON. And let's properly close that. So just by doing this, we delegate to JAX-B using that XML resource annotation the ability to send this time the same request, only asking for JSON, and this time return actually get not only JSON but XML if you want to. Both of them are being served here. So we've sent requests with the command line, we sent requests with the browser. Let's actually use this feature here, which is test RESTful web services straight from the IDE. What this will do here is generate a bunch of JavaScript class code, which will be actually executed locally. So that's why we have here this security alert. That JavaScript, let me bump up the fonts a bit here. Exercise 2. Items, and here's the book key parameter. So we can use, we will send a get. This is the only thing we're able to serve, to receive. Requests for HTML. We need an ID here, so let's get another one, and maybe 911 actually here will do. So let's type 911 and send test. And the result, the response here is an XML representation of the book whose ID is 911. You can see the headers, and you can see the entire discussion on the request going out and the response coming back. Here, it's all there. Now, of course, we could use JSON as well and send the same request, and we get the same data only represented as JSON this time. So I told you when we started the JAX-RS part that we had a web.xml, in this case to define a servlet for Jersey. Jersey is the reference implementation for JAX-RS. And this is mapped to /resources. So let's actually just delete the web.xml file. We don't need it anymore. At least we will not need it once we've created a new Java class that uses a JAX-RS 1.1. That's a new feature in 1.1, which is part of E6. A new class, in this case, a class we'll call application config. This class will, let me get rid of some code here, extend from a class called application. And let me resolve this to the JAX-RS application. And we will annotate this class with an annotation called application path. And this is where we will actually place the resource string, which is how the resources are mapped. So now that we have this, we have code that is even more portable, and certainly portable across different implementations of JAX-RS. So this is just merely a refactoring. Everything should work the same way it did before, but we're just making sure it actually does. And so this concludes the second part of this webinar, which was about RESTful resources with JAX-RS. Now, the third and last part is called CDI, and CDI stands for Context and Dependency Injection. So we're back to working with a WAR file with no web.xml, and this time we have a bit more classes here, and I'll walk you through most of the new ones. We still have our EJB, which is still a stateless EJB, and also a RESTful resource. We have that class called item bean, which is at this point a JSF managed bean with request scope and at EJB injection points for the EJB itself and the singleton we've defined and looked at previously. So one thing I'd like to do here is actually create a beans.xml file. That's a config file which is required for anything CDI. It doesn't need to contain anything, but it needs to be present. And in our case, it's actually going to stay empty throughout this demonstration. And now we can replace every injection point with @inject. So the at resource now becomes at inject. And the at EJB we had previously to inject the item EJB has also been changed here to at inject. One more thing we'll do before we run this is go to the languages, language singleton, and add one annotation, which is at named, to actually give a name to that singleton and make it available from the expression language in facelets, and specifically here in newbook.xhtml, so that we can actually very simply add an output label. And that output label here uses the expression language, uses the bean languages, which we've just defined, and calls the list of values. So let's actually run this application, deploy this to Glassfish 3.0.1, always the same. Wait for the whole thing to build using Maven. I think we're now ready to deploy. And here is the application. So nothing has changed here really. This is just a mere refactoring using CDI. One of the things that we'll see in a moment is that any injection is resolved at startup, not when we actually hit a certain path. Note also here that we actually have what we wanted, which is the list of values as explained previously. And if we click on this, we actually get to the list of values, which just returns the string for the collection. So moving back to the controller, we'll actually start using some of the new features of CDI, and specifically the conversation scoped feature here. So let's just place it here, and we'll get back to this in a moment. And we use the named annotation here as well. So we can actually replace every injection point with at inject at this point, which actually uses a proxy in CDI as opposed to EJB. So you can still use at EJB if you want. So let's go through some other files that we have here. Here the customer is really a simple interface which has two methods: buy and can buy, which returns a boolean or an item for an order. Here's a simple implementation that implements customer. Unfortunately, you cannot buy, and it says so in the can buy method, which returns false no matter what. We also have this other implementation of customer, same interface, different implementation, which this time for buy and can buy actually has real implementations, well, specifically for the buy method. So, an order item is a simple helper pojo here. So let's actually inject a customer. Moving back to item bean, let's say we actually want to make use of a class that is a customer. So at inject, this is an injection point. The type is customer. Let's not use the implementation type, but rather the interface. And let's call this cust. And I have a bunch of code that I will uncomment here, which are really three methods that will be used as bindings in the XHTML. Get forbidden to buy, get buy button label, so either you can buy or you cannot, and the button will say so, and eventually the do buy method. And this is an action event from GSF, which will process the buy the purchase for a book for a given ISBN. Actually, it will add it to the cart, and the checkout will be done later. So let's run one more time. And this time it seems to be stuck on the deploy. If we look at the log and we scroll and we carefully look for the errors, we will see here that we have an injection point ambiguity error. The injection point has ambiguous dependencies, says the error. So if we scroll down a bit more, it actually has all the details about what it's not able to resolve. And specifically, it says here are the two possibilities. I don't know which one to choose. Should it be default customer, which is an implementation of customer, or should it be special customer, which is this other implementation of customer? So to distinguish between the two, we'll go back to the special customer, and we will mark that implementation with an annotation called premium. And premium really is an annotation I've created myself. You see the definition here. This is how you create an annotation in Java, standard boilerplate, but also see this qualifier annotation. This is what makes you be able to use this as a marker on the implementation itself, but also to qualify the injection. Not only do I want to inject the customer, but I want to inject a premium customer. So the key thing here to remember is that there's no dependency between the injection point and the class that's being injected. You can change one without changing the other, and it will not break the other. And that's a key point here. And again, this is one more run. This time we should be able to actually run the application because we know how to resolve this dependency, that what to inject. And here is the application. And we see that there's this additional button here, and the button says buy me, which means this is the special customer. This is the premium customer, if you will. Moving back to the facelet itself, we actually scroll down and see the command button which we've added, which has an action listener bound to the buy method, disable and value attributes bound to two methods in the control as well, and an attribute so we can actually get a holdback of the ISBN that was chosen when selecting that given book. Now, if we go back now this time to item B in the controller itself, here are the three methods that are being called when pressing the buy method, or returning buy me, or sorry can't buy if this is not the right customer. Let's look at a number of other new features in CDI. If we look here at item bean, we inject the customer. Remember that conversation scope that we'll actually make use of that now. So we have the customer, but we also have a conversation in place, which is again here injected using the @inject annotation. Once we have that instance of a conversation class injected, we can use it as follows. For example, here when I do buy, which is actually adding to the cart an item, we will begin a conversation if none is already in place, if it is transient. And we will have this other method which returns a boolean that's called get checkout enabled. If there is a conversation in place, then I can check out. If not, I cannot. And the checkout itself will only happen if there's a conversation in place. And for every item in the order, we will actually process the order. Now we've changed new book here as well. We've added this this command button to checkout. The action listener is bound to do checkout method, and it can be enabled or disabled based on the checkout enabled property of that item bean. So let's run. So there it is. The application has been deployed, and this time not only not only do we have the purchase button, but we also have that checkout button. And if we click, as you've seen in the very beginning of this webinar, we can add books. And notice the checkout button is now available, enabled, and we click on it and it becomes disabled because we've just closed the conversation. And you can see here in the do checkout that we do call end on conversation. There we go. And so I guess this concludes this webinar. I hope you found it useful. Let me actually go through a number of links around the stuff we've seen, and so you can use it for yourself. The first thing I'd like to show you here is the beginning EE6 project on kenai.com. And I'll be in the resources. This is where you can actually find a project that is being set up with all the code you've seen today and more actually. So we have forums, a wiki, a download section, an issue tracker, and obviously the source code itself. So if you browse through the source code, there's a hands-on lab top level directory. And that's where you'll find the code that I've been using here. There's also a tutorial which I'm browsing through right now, and the tutorial is actually something that's more complete, that as it has somewhere in 15 demos, which will go through all the new features of Java E6 one by one, step by step. And if you go back to the source code, you can actually see that not only is there source code for the hands-on lab, you'll see the 3 exercises, both in Maven format, exercise 1, 2, 3, but also in NetBeans format, NetBeans projects. There's a solution if you're stuck. Obviously, there's a parent POM here, and there's a PDF, which is a 20-page document, which you can go through to actually walk for yourself through this various examples that you've seen briefly in this webinar. So there's setup examples, everything, so you can actually reproduce this, maybe even using different tools. Obviously, you may want to go to glassfish.java.net. This is the home for Glassfish, or glassfish.org. These are synonyms. You can see that this is where you can download, of course, the project. If you scroll down, there's a link to the aquarium. And the aquarium is a daily blog on news around Glassfish and Java EE, and several different news around the server-side Javas. And finally, I'd like to encourage you to bookmark glassfish.org/webinars. This is where you have a list of all the replays, the upcoming webinars, and obviously links to registrations for those upcoming webinars. So next month, February 15th, there will be a session on Java EE developer tools, not just NetBeans, but also Eclipse and IntelliJ using Glassfish. There will be a series of features, of webinars covering the features of Glassfish 3.1, including clustering, centralized admin, and so forth. So I encourage you to bookmark this page, as well as the other ones, starting here with the Java EE landing page, the webinar page we've just seen, NetBeans, and the home for the beginning EE6 project on kenai.com, where you have all the code I've been walking through with you in this webinar. And now it's time for the Q&A session. Thank you for your attention. Please bring on the questions.